Hi, it's Josh. So I'm outside the INEOS Grenadier factory in Hambach, France. And of course, I just took a tour, about a 3-hour tour, fabulous tour. It's probably one of the best auto factory tours I've ever taken. And that's because it was personalized and it was very thorough. Because I've toured a lot of car factories, and the bigger the company gets and the more advanced they get, the more they turn it into like a Disneyland attraction. And this was not that. This was a personalized, I was greeted at the gate by Victor Brochet, who is in charge of factory tours, and learned a lot about the history of this factory, and that most of the people that work here, there are 1,600 employees, and 1,200 of them work for INEOS, and about 400 of them work for the vendors and suppliers that do logistics. But a lot of those people worked at the Smart plant when it was owned by Mercedes. And Victor himself has worked at this plant for about 27 years. So there's a lot of history and pride in the people that work here, and they just kind of shifted from building smart cars to building Grenadiers. And so the factory tour that I took kind of took me through the body shop where they assemble the parts. They don't do any parts stamping here. They get all the parts pre-stamped, but they're all welded and put together and assembled. And so the first thing they do is they put the bodies together. And I'm going to insert video where I have some. He was going to supply me with a little bit of inside video that I might be able to kind of show as I talk. But basically, the cars are assembled, and then from there, the sides go on and the roof goes on, and gluing and welding, and it's very detailed and not a fast process. One thing I noticed about this factory is they're not going for speed, they're going for accuracy. And at the moment, I think they could probably double or triple their capacity and still turn out cars. But at the moment, they work one shift, and they all take their breaks at the same time. They all take their lunch at the same time. And they start at 7 in the morning and they stop at about 4 in the afternoon. And then the place shuts down and the parking lot goes empty. And so it sort of shows that they've got room to grow and capacity can be added. But at the moment, they finish the assembly of the vehicles and then they go over to the paint shop. And we actually got to tour the paint shop. Now, again, when you go tour car factories, you rarely get to go see the paint shop, where they actually are dipping the cars in the electrostatic paint to protect them, the first primer coat, and then after the bath, they're dried and sanded, and the whole process that we're going through, we got to see it all. And of course, most of it's through windows, but it was a 3-story building that we went through that had, I mean, it smelled like a paint factory, I have to be honest. It was interesting seeing the cars come through, and then they, twist and turn through the maze of assembly line, and then they go through the actual paint shop where the robots are painting them. And the robots paint the cars in different colors, like a red one could come through, and then followed by a magic mushroom. And then the car comes through, and then it's baked. And so they have all these, processes, and I got to basically step through all of it. Now, one thing that you might find interesting, if you ordered a contrasting roof for your car, they actually sideline, after the car is fully painted, a solid color, they sideline the car, and it's taken into a room where they wrap it with painter's plastic for everything except for the roof. And then they sand the roof, and then they send it back through, and it gets the roof painted. So it takes an extra 2 hours for them to do that for a contrast roof. But it was funny seeing the wrapped up car. It just reminded me of a Saturday project where, you're just kind of using the masking tape and plastic, painter's plastic, and that's exactly what they do. And so once that's done, then it goes to the drying tunnel, and then they take the painted cars over to general assembly. Another thing that I found interesting was that, the Grenadier body is steel, but the doors and the hood and the roof are aluminum. And so they have certain processes for mating the aluminum to the steel. For instance, the door hinges that are put onto the car, the part that touches the door is aluminum, but the part that touches the body is steel. And so it prevents any kind of corrosion because they actually attach the doors before they paint the car, and then they remove them before they do the final assembly. But then after the paint shop, we went into the assembly hall where we saw them actually putting the engines with the transmissions and doing that basic assembly of the parts or the sub-assembly. And then they had, stations for each different process. And then a lot of times near the assembly line, they'd have kits. So they'd have a little box with little cubby holes in it so that they would make sure they had all the different parts needed for that particular build. But if you've ever toured a car factory, it's very much like any other car factory. It's just that, well, it's a Grenadier, but also it's moving a little bit slower, should I say. Today's production, the target was 66 cars, and they had, monitor boards saying whether they were ahead or behind, and that didn't seem to be anything out of character. And then they had an area where if something didn't pass a test, they called it the rework area, which, if it needed an extra this or that, they have lots of checks and balances here. I think it sort of reassured me about the quality. Overall, if it's not a problem, it's not going to be a problem. And, occasionally something might slip through, but it's not intentional on their part. They're doing things very precisely here. He said, even though we're in France, it's a very German-oriented factory. And that might be because of the heritage of Mercedes having been here before. And then a couple of things that I saw that you don't normally see. I got to see about 3 of the 4 Detour Arcane Works colors around the plant. So those colors do exist. And also on the factory line, there were a lot of 1924s in production. So if you ordered a 1924 special edition, it's probably being built because there were a lot of those coming through. But got to see all the color combinations, and some I thought everyone looked good. You can't make a bad choice in the Grenadier. The paints are really rich, and they just show well. Some look different in daylight than they do in dark light. But I saw a lot of the Devil's Red. That seems to be popular. And the whites and the mushrooms, a lot of those. Didn't see too much Queen's Red. Saw a few green, a lot of Britannia blue, and not a lot of contrast roofs. So if you want to stand out, you probably want to get that contrast roof. But after the sub-assemblies, we started walking through the final assembly hall where the doors got taken back off the cars, and then they went to be put together, and they install the glass and the panels and all those things before they bring them back to the car. But in similar car factory fashion, it was all very well orchestrated. One thing that I thought was very interesting was that the quartermasters are basically just the chassis, and that the bed doesn't get put in till later once it goes onto the frame, because being a chassis on frame setup, the station wagons went through kind of as a single piece, but the quartermasters, just the cab came through, and then the bed was assembled after the frame was put on, or the chassis was put onto the frame. And the frames come in one door, and then they get, brakes attached to brake lines and all the different parts. But as it went, I don't know, it was just really interesting watching the dashboards be assembled. Everything's made here, everything's built here, and we actually got to see it. So anyway, I'm sure I'm kind of rambling a little bit here, but basically, if you're ever in Hambach, which is a big ask because Hambach is not near, the closest city it's near is Strasbourg, which kind of is on the border of France and Germany. And it's a bit of a trip to get out here, but if you ever have the opportunity, if you're really a Grenadier fan, it's worth the visit, because we got a wonderful personalized tour. And I can't say that, you know, the first time I toured the Land Rover factory was a personalized tour, and that was in 1995. And now you pay 50 pounds for a tour or something like that. So, you know, as things grow, things change. And I think we learned that we're the only tour that came through this week. So it's not a frequent thing for visitors to come through. But if you're interested, you can send me a message, and I will be happy to give you the contact to contact the factory. I'm not putting his email in the comments because I don't want to have anybody barraged with questions. So you need to reach out to me by contacting me through the email address at my channel page, and I'll be happy to give you information about how to reach out and schedule a tour. I scheduled my tour for last year, and of course it got canceled or postponed because of the Recaro seat fiasco. And so it took me an extra year to get out here, but it was worth it. So I'm really glad I did. So before I finish up, I'm gonna just pan around and show you we're outside of the factory again. And I'm just gonna show you what there is to see when you pull up to the gate. So as you can see, the cars are here. We were here yesterday, and the cars weren't here. That's Keith taking pictures of me. This is the main gate. And this is where we were greeted by our tour guide. But as factories go, it's an easy one because there's one parking lot. There's not 14 gates like some of the German car factories, and it's not that difficult to find. Of course, I was concerned that I wouldn't find it or that I'd land in the wrong spot, but quite frankly, it was a really easy find. So the directions are straightforward if you end up coming out here. But anyway, I'm gonna sign off for now, and if I can think of other things, I'll put them into other inserts in the video. But I just sort of wanted to do a little bit of a brain dump before I left the factory, because there was so much information that I took in, and I probably only gave you about 1/10 of it. And if I remember some other things, I'll try and share them as we go. So anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.